Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Peter Howard, CEO of Realtime Robotics, a manufacturing automation platform that's raised $70 million in funding. Peter, how are you?
Great. Thank you, Brett, for having me.
No problem. I'm super excited to have you here and really excited to talk about everything that you're building in this company. But I know you've been at this for a long time. You've built a lot of great companies. So I want to go back to your early years, the founding of your first company. You were just joking in the pre-interview. That was quite a ways before I was born. So take us back to the 80s and your early days building technology.
Well, so my first startup was in the electronic space. It was founded actually in Singapore. And this was based on needs that we had learned of in Silicon Valley, fundamentally Apple related. And Apple had significant outsourcing going on in Singapore. And we set up a company to basically do that work for them.
And for you, what was the inspiration to get into entrepreneurship? You know, if I think about the kind of world today, being a founder is cool, being an entrepreneur is cool. I can remember about 20 years ago when I got started, that just sounded like you were kind of unemployed. Being an entrepreneur wasn't cool. It's very cool now. So if that's me, what was it like for you? What was the world like for entrepreneurs, for founders? How was it viewed in just society as a whole?
So honestly, entrepreneurship goes back an awful long way. I think it's kind of part of the human condition. My father was one of the co-founders of what is today Thermo Fisher Scientific. So I grew up in a household that talked a lot about business formation, how to do it, what are the challenges. This was kind of the discussion around the dinner table from 6 years old. So it's something I was kind of born into.
I see. So no one that knew you when you were 6 or when you were 10 would say, wow, do you see Peter now? He's going out building companies. This was what you were supposed to do, what you were determined to do.
I think that's true, yes. My former high school sweetheart was not surprised at all when she learned of what I was doing.
Now, if we look at the career, I'm sure there's been a lot of successes and probably some low points, some failures. Let's talk about the failures. I know the successes are always the fun stuff, but I'll bring you into the pain cave, I think is the term here. For you, what was one of those really big lows that you had to really navigate in your career?
Well, several, current, former, ongoing. When you start a company, fundamentally, unless you are wildly lucky, as I was with my first startup, you're going to experience ups and downs, challenges that you're not sure you're actually going to be able to make it through. And you just have to, you either give up or you hunker down and you try and motor through. Luck plays an awful lot in that equation. First startup in Singapore was, year one, we did 14 million in revenue. Year two, we did 44 million. Year three, we broke 100 million. And I was, at the time, 28 years old, leading a group in a country that I didn't grow up in, with technology coming out of Japan, which I also didn't grow up with. And we were just lucky. We were in the right place at the right time, and we rode a wave. The second startup was in France. We kind of started along that same sort of trajectory. And then the economy in France, and in kind of as Europe was trying to form the European Union, there were very strict rules that they were trying to adopt for fiscal responsibility and to keep the parity of the different currencies. And we wound up with a huge amount of debt, having to pay 25% interest rates because that's what the French government had to do to maintain parity with the Deutschmark. And so getting through that crunch, was kind of the first major challenge. My third startup was right at the time of 9/11, and our target market and all of our order book at that point in time were with the aircraft industry. So we had just raised on the 8th of September, we raised a round, a growth round. And because we had a $25 million order book that we were working to fulfill. And when after 9/11 happened, nobody was ordering aircraft anymore for almost 3 years. So we had built the company up to about 65 people to meet the demand. And we had to take it down to about 12 people to weather that storm.
Wow.
Where I can go on, the current political environment with the Trump administration and tariffs and so on are messing pretty seriously with our target market and throws up its own set of challenges. You have to be durable. You have to keep looking at, the whole concept of entrepreneurship is finding your way through difficult challenges. So that's just life in this particular lane.
Well, let's talk about the current thing and everything that you're doing now. So let's start with the why. So why'd you get back into it? Why are you back again for a fifth startup? And then we can talk about what the company does.
So the particular company, Realtime Robotics, is a SaaS. Basically, we're providing SaaS-based artificial intelligences, and this is to empower robotic system builders, so system integrators in the parlance, to enable them to reliably get powerful, cost-effective solutions to market in much less time. We currently are touting less than half of the time and with less than half of the labor. And we work with those who are building robotic systems for traditional industrial applications like automotive, spot welding, kind of the poster child of robotics, but also to the vast emerging array of new applications. So both kind of the hardcore old school stuff as well as the dynamic applications that are emerging. How I got here? Well, I've told you a little bit about my background with other startups. The third startup, the one that was seriously impacted by 9/11, was in the robotic space, robotics and sensing. And the first two companies we exited via IPOs, so you could call those pretty stellar successes. The third startup, we didn't make it to that level. It was generally successful, but it wasn't wildly successful. And the current startup that I'm with, I got involved with because I got this call out of the blue from a guy that I knew who was then currently heading Duke's entrepreneurship office. Said, "Hey, Peter, I know you've got some background in robotics and sensing, and we've got this Duke University spin out that's looking for leadership, and it happens to be in that same space. Do you know anybody?" And I said, "Well, let me take a look at what it is." They sent me some material, and I realized right away that this was their breakthrough technology would have made that third startup wildly successful. So I jumped on a plane, flew down to meet them, and got started working with them very shortly thereafter, put the first money into the company, brought the team up to Boston, which is a great place to grow a robotics company. And we're now into the 8th year of operation.
What did the first, let's say, 3 to 6 months look like? Take us back to those early days of the company.
So actually, yes, it looked like I told you the story about good luck, how important luck is. Well, we were very lucky that the breakthrough in technology had been kind of made public at a big robotics event. And several major corporations, including Amazon Toyota Motors and Samsung had expressed pretty keen interest. So this was kind of a birthday present that came with the group as we got started. So my early role was working with those three companies to land contracts to bring the development of the technology forward and negotiating with them over eventual commercial terms for supply of the products should the development be successful.
How did you convince them to trust you? Is it just because of your track record and what you've achieved in your career, or what were they
The
really betting on there?
track record was certainly helpful. It was certainly very helpful in convincing the technical founders of the company to add me to the team. It was also very important for the three major multinationals because in between startups, I have spent about half my career in major multinational corporations. So I know how they think, how they proceed. And so I felt comfortable to them.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. How do they think and how do they proceed? For those listening in who haven't spent any of their career working at these companies, like what's it like inside of them? Like, how are they making their decisions? Just any insights that you can share would be really fascinating to the audience.
Well, that's a vast subject, Brett. In large corporations have personalities just like human, individuals do, just like local societies have, So it's not easy to paint a clear picture, broad brush, but those who work in large corporations generally are willing and able to deal with slow moving processes and comfortable with slow moving processes. So if you are a startup, you're burning money because you're not making money yet. There's no income other than what's coming from your investors, and investors generally don't like it when you burn that too quickly. So the challenge with big companies is to get them to pay for what you're doing so that you're not burning your investor money, but you're burning their money. And so hopefully you're doing to provide them something that's of use to them. But, I think a lot of startups get caught in the trap of giving stuff away, because they want to develop a customer base and they're willing to spend money to do that. But if you go down that path, you have no assurance that they've actually gotten authorization from higher levels that this is something that's a corporate priority, right? So the only way you can ascertain whether what you're doing with them means something to the organization is to extract your pound of flesh for the privilege of working with you.
You mentioned that's a common startup trap. What are other startup traps that you've seen founders fall into or teams fall into?
Well, I mean, I've been guilty of a good number of putting my foot into different traps. I think that one of the most common is to accelerate your spend on the go-to-market resources before you've got something that's really been shaken out. So you need to have sufficient resources on board for interacting with customers, product people, but they need to be commercially oriented product people. And you don't need a lot of them to develop a solid understanding of the marketplace that you're trying to serve. Do you really have something for them? How far away are you? How much money do you have to spend to get there? I think often, and I've been guilty of this myself, if you get feedback from the market that, if you're an entrepreneur, you've got a good imagination, right? So you see the future state and you think you're already very close. And so you start to gear up and bring resources on board that are going to consume your hard-won investment dollars pretty quickly. And so it's very tempting to go ahead and get started in building out your market resources. And let's say if you haven't really done the work necessary, that's the quickest way to kill your company.
What are the signals that you look for, or how do you know it's time to start investing that cash into go to market?
I mean, the tried and true method for that most investors try, that most investors use, the rule of thumb is, well, when people start buying it, it's time to start selling it, right? So I would say that's the simple thing. Are you generating cash? I mean, today's rule of thumb for software companies that like ours, for a growth round, to raise a big chunk of change to really blow out your go-to-market resources, is $1 million a month in revenue being generated. So that's really safe, right? If you've got that going, you can pretty safely invest a bunch more money in expanding that. I think, the investment community goes through wild cycles of being, insanely enthusiastic by turns, insanely cold by other turns, right? Depending on the sector that you're in, there's some that are going up and some that are going down with investors. And it's important to be able to read that and to know what's going on in the market. I mean, once you've started a company, you can't really choose your timing. But what you can do is to raise money when the raising's good. Don't spend it just because you've got it. Sequester it away and use it when the rainy day comes, because rainy days are going to come.
You'd mentioned there that early on you're able to land those, first 3 paying customers. Did you start to invest in go to market then right away? Because you had your paying customers. Like, when did you go full throttle on the go to market side?
So we did go fairly full throttle for the first time 3 years later, and learned as we did that there were barriers, that the early uptake in, the early appetite for our product was quite real, but there were barriers that we hadn't foreseen that prevent, and particularly we serve in the traditional robotics market, the traditional users of robots, and mostly in the automotive industry, are pretty creaky, old, arthritic organizations that, particularly in manufacturing, don't like to mess with things. So we had very enthusiastic support from the advanced engineering people, from the manufacturing engineering people. And when we got to a point where all boxes were checked in kind of the normal introduction of new technologies, processes, and so we started to go full throttle. And when it got to the actual manufacturing leadership, the plant managers, of facilities that are producing billions of dollars of cars per year, they said, hold on a second, guys. Listen, the engineering people had taken us through exercises that showed that we would be saving, this in particular was Toyota, we would be saving them in a typical facility $50 million a year by being able to avoid downtime and to minimize the downtime and recovery cycle when it did happen. And this was very well documented, very clear, solid value proposition. Toyota has 36 such factories. It just made a lot of sense from the pay-per-view. But the incentives for the production management were not, they're not based on saving operating costs. They're based on making sure that the production is coming off the line at the pace that they're selling cars. So the head of manufacturing said, hold on a second, guys, if we adopt your technology wholesale and we save $50 million, I don't get any of that credit. That credit goes to the advanced engineering team. But if you shut down my production line because you missed a detail or two, my ass is going to get fried and I'm going to lose my job. So I'm not doing it, period. So, we had to go through a cycle of downsizing the group of go-to-market team and hunker down and figure out how we were going to either get around that obstacle or, find another path for bringing our products to market. So not an unusual problem with creaky old industries. But yeah, so that's an example of one of many concrete walls that I've run into in my career.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
What about the market category and how you're positioned? Is it manufacturing automation software, or how do you think about the category that you're in and customers are buying?
Yeah, I think I really like your focus on category because it forces you to think about things more clearly. I wish, frankly, that somebody had asked me that question 8 years ago, because we would have spent a lot more time focusing on trying to really hone what is it that we're trying to do and how do we live in that ecosystem. We've actually probably gone through 3 different remakings of our technology and how we bring it to the market. So as we stand now, the products which we're bringing to market are part of what we've learned is the product lifecycle management side of software and SaaS. And in particular, so we work in segments of that market that are very much focused on production. So how do you design your product for manufacturability? How do you design your manufacturing infrastructure for manufacturing of the products that you're in? And as robotics is now becoming kind of advanced robotics, not kind of go-kart robots, but robots that do transformational work, not just transfer type of work. Those are becoming now more and more necessary for any kind of industrial manufacturing because you can't find people who want to do that work anymore. Toyota runs at a 15 to 20% deficit in all of its factories around the world. People just don't want to do that work. So these are the parts of the software space that we inhabit. And we've gone from early days with Amazon. We had a hardware product that we sold to them, same for the other firms that I mentioned, to a software as a service that runs on general purpose hardware that lives in the factory. And that's one of our product lines. The other is software as a service that sits in the cloud and connects to all of the other pieces of the product development cycle, connects to the CAD system that is being used to design the product and test the product out, but it also connects to the CAD system that's used for designing the production infrastructure. And there we're providing autonomous and AI. It's not like a large language model AI. It's not probabilistic. It's quite deterministic because you can't have robots that crash into each other only 5% of the time. You need them to never crash into each other. So, kind of the AI that we're familiar with in the language models, that doesn't work for factory. Anyway, our AI is used for, at design time, being able to automatically generate the entire robotic cycle without having to have humans program it.
How excited are you about robotics today? Like, I feel like I'm an outsider. I'm not from the robotics industry, but it has to feel like you're in this incredible, exciting time.
We are in an incredible, exciting time, but I would say that the public perception of how incredible and exciting it is probably overhyped.
Overhyped.
Yeah, robots are really capable of doing, and what our human imagination has supplied to what they can do are two entirely different things. And I think the humanoid robot hype that, when you see a humanoid robot, it looks so cool. But if you want to think about it as a production asset, maybe you would look through different lenses. Just to give you a little bit of background for that, typical collaborative robot, you should expect it to fail fairly catastrophically in a production environment once every year and a half. And a humanoid robot is like 6 to 10 of those put together so that you have 1/6 to 1/10 of that life cycle before they crash, before they fail. And essentially what that means is that you need to have 2 or 3 humanoid robots to do one person's job because the other two are going to be in the repair shop.
So you're saying I should buy one of these humanoids anytime soon if they become available? Or
I would definitely not recommend it. I mean, it's a remarkably well hyped up because it appeals to us, right? I mean, for me, this goes back to the Jetsons, but every generation has its own version of, you maybe grew up with some of the later Terminator series, right?
yes.
So, but fundamentally, robots are expensive. They're a little bit finicky. They have personalities, which you really don't want in a production asset. And our science, our breakthroughs are all to erase most of that and make them just simple, productive assets.
Final couple of questions here before we wrap. I know you're on the East Coast, so I don't want to keep you any later than I have to. Let's talk about the big picture vision that you have for the company. What is the impact going to look like, let's say 3 to 5 years from today? What is that big picture vision?
So the big picture has really remained unchanged in spite of the various twists and turns. Fundamentally, we were formed to exploit our technology to help make the deployment of robotic systems way easier, way more affordable. Right now, robots are capable of doing almost anything. You can build a robotic system to do almost anything you or I do, but it's not economically practical. And it's not economically practical in large part because programming them is a real pain in the butt. It's expensive. It's, like I said, finicky. They have personalities. And so what we've done is to create a platform that eliminates, let's say, 90% of the headache and heartache that you have with these systems. And basically so that you can ask them to do things and just get them done and not have to worry about all the stuff down in the basement, the dirty laundry, the gears and oil and stuff. So the reason that we were so interested in this is because if you can take the cost down by 50%, you open up a vast array of things which become suddenly economically viable. Picking strawberries, which, compared to migrant labor, that's a pretty challenging bar to get there, but it's doable. Robots themselves, the industrial style robots, are really pretty reliable, long-lived assets. So the world that we would like to create is one where robots can do all of the really dull and or the really dangerous work that people don't really want to do anymore. So in terms of where we go as a company, my past exits have been mostly IPO. IPO is a great way to offer your investors liquidity. They can choose whether they stay, let their bet ride, or they'll take the money and run. So that's ideal. Unfortunately, IPOs are, there's a cycle. And if you hit the cycle, that's great. If you don't, and you've got investors who want liquidity, you need to take a route that brings you through acquisition. Because of the work we do, we are intimately working with the CAD companies, the enterprise software companies, blah, blah, blah. So we're already in regular contact. We're already, we've had discussions since day one with Amazon, for example, about, well, if this works out, we may want to acquire you. So those are discussions that are kind of always in the background. We want to grow the company considerably further than we are right now before we pull that trigger, however.
That tees up the last question that I wanted to ask you. And that question is, what's it like to IPO a company? Most founders I know, myself included, we want to do that someday. That's on the bucket list for, I think, all tech founders and most founders in general. What's it like? You've done it twice.
Well, what I would say is, from my experience, you should plan on finding and hiring somebody to do most of that work for you and who enjoys life as a figurehead spokesperson talking to an investment community that it can be pretty harsh and pretty critical. So it's not, it is the best thing for your investors. It's the best path for you as an individual. If you're leading a company that, that you're bringing public, it's not very much fun at all. It's a lot of work and it's not necessarily fun work. There is the fun of, enjoying the success. But in terms of what makes most entrepreneurs tick, my suggestion, generally speaking, would be if you're going to take that step, well, at least realize that your personality type is probably not best fit for the duty cycle that you will have.
What did it feel like, though, for you? Like when you went to bed that night after that first IPO, like, what did it feel like? Do you remember that feeling?
Sure. Elation, right? There is a joy to seeing your dreams realized. That's what drives silly people like me.
Amazing. Well, we look forward to following along with the journey, and we'll be watching for this next IPO. It sounds like it'll be maybe a couple of years out, but you have to keep us in mind. We want the first interview after the IPO.
Thanks very much, Brett.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the time. This has been a lot of fun.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.